The theory of parallel worlds has been discussed in the scientific community for a very long time. Unfortunately, we're not developed enough yet to prove or disprove it. But it's still an interesting theory, and that's why we have a lot of unusual urban legends about the guests from a parallel reality, according to many. Let's check out a few of them. A man from a non-existent country. This story took place in 1851 in a small German village, Frankfurt an der Oder. A lost man came out to the local villagers asking for help. The man introduced himself as Jopar Voren. He spoke very poor German and had a very strong accent. The man himself claimed that he speaks Laxar and Abram, languages that don't actually exist on our Earth. He claimed to be from Laxaria, a country on the mainland called Sacria, separated from Europe by a huge ocean. However, none of these places existed on the Earth's map. People sent Jopar to the local authorities. He talked to a psychiatrist, but the doctor concluded that the man was totally sane. An investigation by the local police also revealed nothing suspicious about him. Jopar Voren claimed that the purpose of his visit to Europe was to find his long-lost brother. He survived a shipwreck and found himself near the village. They showed him a map of the world and a globe and asked him to indicate the place where he crashed, but he didn't recognize anything familiar. He seemed to have extensive knowledge about his homeworld. Jopar named 5 main continents on it: Sacria, Aflar, Astar, Auslar, and Uplar. His story was considered plausible. Scientists from Frankfurt decided to send the man to Berlin for further research. However, during the trip, he had something like a seizure. The man suddenly jumped out of the carriage and disappeared into the surrounding forest. Despite a long and thorough search, no traces of Jopar were found. He seemed to have disappeared as mysteriously as he had appeared. Inspector Leboeuf, who was assigned to escort him to Berlin, thought this man could be a being from another world, and that he had returned from where he had come from. Lady on Highway 167. This incident happened on October 20th, 1969. It was first reported in 1988 in the magazine Strange. The article tells about 2 men, LC and his business partner, Charlie. The names are fictitious. One afternoon, LC and Charlie were driving along Highway 167 in southwest Louisiana. Discussing work, they drove toward the oil center of Lafayette. The highway was empty at first, but then the men noticed a very old and very slow car ahead. The men started discussing this mysterious car. Such cars hadn't been produced for several decades, but this one looked quite new. The men thought it was thanks to the owner's care and admired it. They slowed down to get a better look at the car. LC noticed a bright orange sign on it that said 1940. They saw a driver. It was a young woman in old-fashioned clothes, a hat with a long feather and a fur coat, even though it was warm outside. There was a child next to her, also dressed in a warm coat and a hat. LC and Charlie wanted to talk to her, but then they noticed the expression on her face. The woman was looking around in panic, almost on the verge of crying. LC called out to her and asked if she needed help. She nodded, and he gestured for her to park on the side of the road. But when the men also parked, they suddenly noticed that the woman's car had disappeared. They looked around the highway in shock. She couldn't have gone somewhere far so fast, but the car was nowhere to be found. After some time, another man drove up to LC and Charlie. He saw everything that happened and claimed that the car had simply disappeared. The men talked about the incident for several hours. When they reached the city, they contacted the police. However, the police couldn't help them in any way. Apart from their words, there was no confirmation of the existence of the car. The case was discussed for a while in local newspapers, and then was forgotten. The Gadianton Canyon Incident. This incident occurred in May of 1972 in southeastern Utah near the Modena Railroad crossing on the edge of the Escalante Desert. Jenna North was driving her father's 1971 Chevrolet Nova. Her friend, Carol Abbott, was in the passenger seat. In the back seat, there were two other girls, Lisa Rockford and Bethany Gordon. It was after 10 p.m. when the girls crossed the Utah-Nevada state line. They wanted to get back to campus before their housekeeper, Mrs. Mortensen, locked the dorm doors. This stretch of Highway 56 in Utah is pretty deserted. There's nothing there but sand and a few plants. The girls were very happy when they finally noticed the Union Pacific Railroad crossing in Modena. But right behind the railing, Jenna noticed two highways. One went into the desert, and the other to Gadianton Canyon. The girls decided to take the road to the canyon. They thought it would be a shortcut to campus. The other girls were chatting with each other when Jenna noticed that they were no longer driving on asphalt, but on white cement. "Watch out!" suddenly shouted one of the girls. The road ended abruptly at a high rock wall. It was a dead end. They had to go back the same way they came here. And while Jenna's friends were complaining that now they would have to sleep in the car, Jenna saw that the landscape had changed dramatically. They weren't in the desert anymore. Instead, the canyon turned into an open area with wheat fields, pine thickets, and a small lake ahead. A full moon was shining in the sky, which was strange because it shouldn't have been there that night. The girls had no idea where they were, so they just drove to the light ahead. It was some building that they thought was a diner or restaurant. The girls saw a bright neon sign, but none of them could read what was written on it. These symbols were unlike any language they knew. Suddenly, several people came out of the building. They seemed shocked and frightened by Jenna's Chevrolet. They waved their hands and shouted something, but the girls didn't understand them. Lisa decided to ask the men for directions. She stuck her head out of the window and immediately let out a terrifying scream. "Get out of here!" she shouted to Jenna. The Chevrolet sped away from the building. Bright headlights illuminated their car from behind. They were being chased by a few vehicles. These vehicles were egg-shaped, had 3 wheels, and made a buzzing sound. The road ahead led back to the canyon. Jenna didn't have time to slow down and crashed right into it. The vehicles had disappeared, together with an unfamiliar landscape. The girls were back in the desert again. Fortunately, none of them were hurt, physically. But Lisa was in a state of shock. She was saying again and again, "They weren't human!" The girls had to help her walk. An hour later, they were able to stop a Utah Highway Patrol car. They told the police their story. The details of the report compiled by the police officer were complicated and confusing. During the investigation, the police couldn't figure out from the tire tracks exactly where the car went astray. The tracks ended very abruptly, as if the Chevrolet had suddenly disappeared. The police couldn't explain how the car could have driven 2 miles without leaving any traces, especially on such solid ground. There are still disputes about this story, but in the end, all versions and explanations of what happened are just guesses. Perhaps we'll never find out the truth. These were the urban legends about interdimensional traveling. Of course, there's no proof that any of these stories are real. Often the truth turns out to be very mundane. For example, the famous man from Taured, who people also called a guest from another reality, turned out to be a simple fraudster named John Allen Kuchar Zegras. But even so, these stories are still very interesting.
Do you remember yourself 10 years ago? The world around you was very different from now, wasn't it? No wonder. The 21st century is the age of rapid technological progress, and we're advancing at a mind-blowing rate. So, what do you think our world will look like by 2030? It's less than 10 years from now, but by various accounts, it's going to be some really exciting years. Let's see. Solar panels will beat fossil fuels in energy output, becoming the largest source of energy on the planet. Researchers from Thomson Reuters are sure this will happen because of new and modernized materials. With those, solar panels will be able to absorb much more sunlight, and even when it's overcast. Augmented and virtual reality will become a thing. Today, it's a pretty new and raw technology. But 10 years from now, it will already be something that everybody uses in their everyday lives. For example, you'll be able to have a virtual tour around a hotel before booking a room in it. Or how about taking a good look at 3D models of all goods in a store before adding them to your cart? Handy! Speaking of augmentations, people themselves will become enhanced. Imagine having microchips embedded into your skin instead of a paper or plastic ID. Having bionic limbs with all the functions real arms and legs possess. Or having implants that improve the work of internal organs. You name it. By 2030, all this and more will become available to the masses. And from then on, it'll only get cheaper and more popular. The problem of traffic jams will either be solved altogether or very close to it. With the growing demand for driverless cars and even flying cars, oh, can't wait! The human factor will decrease dramatically. And since it's the main reason why traffic congestion even exists, big cities will finally enjoy relatively free roads, and we'll all be able to get things done on time. Can't wait for it. By the way, gasoline fuel will become a fading memory by 2030. Electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles will push gas-powered ones further and further out of the market. Also, solar-powered cars will probably emerge, gradually replacing all the rest. Just imagine a car that only requires sunlight and some time to charge before you can go wherever you please. No more running out of fuel in the middle of nowhere. The Internet of Things, or IoT, will be omnipresent. Smart homes, smart offices, whole smart buildings. Literally everything will be connected with everything else, separated only by closed internal networks. Living alone, yet coming home from work to a hot dinner and a clean house will become a reality. Everything will be done automatically, following just a few flicks of your finger over your smartphone or tablet screen. The internet will become truly global. Today, only 3 billion people in the world have constant access to the web, while the other 5 billion have either limited access or none at all. Several large companies like Google, Facebook, and SpaceX are already working together on a project that will bring the internet to everyone on the planet at speeds over 1 megabit per second. By 2030, it'll surely be implemented. Artificial intelligence will make a huge leap forward. In around 10 years' time, the AI will not only be able to answer simple questions and follow your commands, but it will also become deeper and more inquisitive itself. It will probably even be able to talk to you. Not like Siri does today, but rather like Tony Stark's Jarvis. In short, it will become everyone's ultimate helper. Medicine won't stay where it is either. Even now, more and more advances are made in this crucial field, and in 10 years, doctors will find solutions to the most important issues we're currently facing. These include a cure for cancer and AIDS, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and many other conditions that have plagued humans for a long time already. Of course, it's not as easy as it sounds, and it won't be cheap at first. But the main thing is that the answers will be found, and the rest is a matter of time. The human genome will most probably be cracked, and only ethical issues will remain before genetic modifications of people becomes available. With those, we'll be able to get rid of pretty scary genetic conditions in children even before they're born. Scientists all over the world discuss this possibility, even today. So, by 2030, the question should have a definite answer. Plastic will finally become a thing of the past. The same Thomson Reuters report I told you about earlier says that biodegradable materials based on cellulose will replace plastic packaging for all purposes. No more littering the soil and the oceans. We'll be making a huge step towards a greener planet. And the new material will feel like plastic, by the way, so you won't even notice the difference. Here's a little bit of sci-fi for you. Teleportation and time travel won't be a myth any longer. Scientists have recently discovered that quantum teleportation is possible, while others made an experiment where particles return to their previous state, making it seem like time traveling for them. The researchers stress that quantum experiments can't prove that these things can actually be repeated in the material world. And, of course, we won't be able to go to the past or teleport around the world in 10 years' time. But the concept itself will become more real either way. With genetic modification becoming commonplace, modified crops will be grown indoors. Changes to the plant's DNA will make them more resilient and less prone to failure, while at the same time increasing the yield. The times when GMOs were up for debate will have long since gone, and everyone will be able to literally taste the progress. Robots will take over the most menial jobs on the market, making humans turn their attention to more intellectual tasks and opening new opportunities for avid learners. Everything that can be done by robots will not require human assistance any longer. However, in some spheres, these robotic workers won't be completely autonomous. They'll have to be manipulated by people either directly or by programming them to do the required stuff. That will open up new jobs. So no need to fear that robots will take away from us and add to the unemployment rate. Speaking of learning, acquiring new skills will be much easier in 10 years than today. With the development of AR and VR, which I told you about earlier on, even the most practical skills will stop needing your actual presence in the room with your teacher. Want to learn how to drive a car? Here's a simulator, right in the comfort of your own home. Perhaps such a method of learning won't be too widespread yet, but it will definitely start taking over the minds of people and get more and more popular with every passing year. Machine learning will also make large progress. Things like near-perfect electronic translators, navigation systems that adapt to your driving style, and other gadgets and software will make our everyday lives much easier. We'll be able to communicate with anyone we want, almost without the language barrier, and do our routine stuff quickly and without any discomfort. And it's all thanks to clever machines that teach themselves off their surroundings and the decisions taken either by humans around them or by the machine itself. 5G mobile internet connections will be a common thing in most technologically advanced countries and cities. With 4G, it takes up to an hour to download a movie from the web, but 5G takes it to a whole new level, downloading the same movie in just a few seconds. The connection speed of this network is simply astounding, and it allows all kinds of things to be done, from real-time broadcasting of sports events, like it was done during the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang in 2018, to long-distance manipulation of robot surgeons by actual doctors. Blockchain will become the preferred method of transferring money and valuable assets between people and organizations. You must have heard about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Those are based on the blockchain technology. In short, it allows you to get rid of the middleman while transferring your money, making the operation secure and direct. For example, when you make a transfer from card to card, your bank plays the role of that middleman. It tracks all your transactions and can block your account if you do something it thinks is suspicious. With blockchain, nobody but you knows of your operations, which makes it pretty awesome. You know your money is always in your hands, until you spend it. And finally, entertainment will become even more diverse with the growth and popularity of space tourism. Right now, entrepreneurs like Richard Branson and Elon Musk are only beginning to launch their first space tours, and they'll only be affordable for the wealthiest. But by 2030, the cost of it will slowly start to decrease, as the whole process will become more easily performed. I'm not saying we'll all be able to go see the stars firsthand. It'll still be very expensive. But it will be a beginning, and who knows? Maybe in another decade, we'll be riding rockets into orbit like we fly in airplanes today.
The moon is the second brightest object in our sky. At the same time, among other astronomical bodies, it's one of the dimmest and least reflective. Our natural satellite only seems bright because it's so close to Earth. For comparison, our planet looks much brighter when you look at it from space. It's because clouds, ice, and snow reflect way more light than most types of rock. Triton, Neptune's moon, has all its surface covered with several layers of ice. If this satellite replaced our current moon, the night sky would get 7 times brighter. The closer the moon is to the horizon, the larger it looks. This phenomenon is called the moon illusion. One of the theories explaining it claims that the atmosphere plays the role of a magnifying glass, which makes the moon look bigger. In reality, if the atmosphere had a say in it, the moon would actually look smaller, not bigger. Most experts believe that the illusion is created by your own mind. It can increase the moon's size more than twice. When Earth's satellite is high up in the sky, you don't have any visual cues about how far away it is. But when it's near the horizon, you can see objects surrounding it in detail. It makes the moon look larger. But it's just one of the many theories explaining the phenomenon. By the way, you can trick yourself out of this illusion if you bend down and look at the moon upside down through your legs. 2 or 3 years ago, an asteroid was pulled into Earth's orbit and started to travel around the planet. Even though it's no larger than an average car, it's still a big deal. Out of more than 1 million asteroids astronomers know about, it's only the second one to orbit our planet. Called 2020 CD3, it's our temporary mini-moon. It won't be with Earth for long, though. The asteroid is following a random orbit and is slowly drifting away. Temporarily captured objects, such as 2020's CD3, are rare. They need to have specific direction and speed to be caught by Earth's gravitational pull. Otherwise, they either crash into the planet or fly in another direction. A transient lunar phenomenon is one of the most enigmatic things happening on the moon. It's a short-lived light, color, or some other change on the satellite's surface. Most commonly, it's random flashes of light. Astronomers have been observing this phenomenon since the 1950s. They've noticed that the flashes occur randomly. Sometimes they can happen several times a week. After that, they disappear for several months. Some of them don't last longer than a couple of minutes, but there have been those that continued for hours. The year was 1969, one day before Apollo 11 landed on the moon. One of the mission participants noticed that one part of the natural satellite was more illuminated than the surrounding landscape. It looked as if that area had a kind of fluorescence to it. Unfortunately, it's still unclear if this phenomenon was connected with the mysterious lunar flashes. There might be more metals, for example titanium or iron, in lunar craters than astronomers used to think. The main problem with this finding? It contradicts the main theory about how the moon was formed. That theory says that Earth's natural satellite was spun off from our planet after a collision with a massive space object. But then, why does Earth's metal-poor crust have much less iron oxide than the moon's? It might mean the moon formed from the material lying much deeper inside our planet. Or these metals could have appeared when the molten lunar surface was slowly cooling down. The moon's gravity is about 17% of that on Earth. If you weighed 200 pounds on our home planet, on the moon, your weight would decrease to a mere 34 pounds. You would also be able to carry stuff 6 times heavier than what you can carry on Earth. It would be easier to walk on the moon's surface, but it would be more dangerous too. Your feet inside a heavy spacesuit would sink into the lunar soil up to 6 inches deep. But let's imagine you decided to skip the tedious process of walking by leaping through the air. Then you'd likely lose control of your jumps in no time. Plus, the moon's surface is littered with deep craters. It would be a tough feat to avoid all of them. Not so long ago, astronomers discovered a massive blob of some mysterious substance. It was hidden under the surface of the moon's far side. Its mass was the same as that of a pile of metal 5 times larger than the big island of Hawaii. The enigmatic something lies almost 200 miles beneath an enormous crater that appeared in the lunar surface billions of years ago. The blob likely has something to do with a super collision. It might be the metal core of the object that hit the moon back then. Scientists can't wait to lay their hands on the discovery. It could explain lots of things about the South Pole Aitken crater, the largest known in the solar system. If it was on Earth, its oval-shaped basin would stretch from Washington, D.C. to Texas. There's no air on Earth's natural satellite, but then how can it be rusting? Scientists have discovered the presence of hematite on the moon, and it's a kind of rust. A special NASA research instrument examined the light reflected off the moon's surface. It turned out that the composition of the satellite's poles was very different from the rest of it. The moon's surface is dotted with iron-rich rocks, but without oxygen and liquid water, rust can't appear. Solar winds add to the mystery. They bombard the moon with hydrogen, and hydrogen makes it much more difficult for hematite to form. But even though the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, it still has some trace amounts of oxygen. Its source is our planet's upper atmosphere. Earth also protects the moon from almost 100% of solar winds, although not all the time. And even though our natural satellite is bone dry, there might be water ice in the shadowed craters on its far side. The moon isn't a perfect sphere. It's shaped like an egg. Plus, the satellite's center of mass is a bit more than a mile off its geometric center. The Earth and the moon are gradually drifting apart, as slowly as your fingernails grow. This is the flip side of our satellite's gravitational force. The moon creates tides in the Earth's oceans. They pull back at the moon and make it speed up. This, in turn, moves the satellite to a higher orbit. In prehistoric times, the moon was way closer to our planet than it is now. Luckily, we aren't going to lose the moon. The farther away it moves, the weaker its gravitational pull becomes. It means that soon, our planet won't be pushing the moon away with such a force. There's very little activity going on inside the moon. Plus, there's almost no atmosphere around. That's why scientists can trace impact craters littering the satellite's surface back billions of years. While dating the craters, astronomers discovered that the moon, along with our planet, went through a late heavy bombardment about 4 billion years ago. This event is also known as the Lunar Cataclysm. This interval lasted several hundred millions of years. During it, an unusually large number of asteroids collided with Earth, Mercury, Mars, and Venus. There might be a labyrinth of lava tubes on the moon. Not long ago, astronomers received the results of an underground lunar topography. They discovered a massive cave under the satellite's surface, about 30 miles long and 60 miles wide. The cave's likely to be the result of 3 billion-year-old volcanic activity. After streams of lava hardened, they created a thick, hard crust on the outside. But inside, lava kept flowing, melting the rock and forming tunnels and caves. Countless pits in the moon's surface, discovered by NASA, might be the openings to lava tubes. The moon's orbit around the Earth isn't a circle, it's an oval. That's why the distance between our planet and the satellite varies from over 225,000 miles to more than 250,000 miles. There's very little seismic activity going on inside the moon. Yet, mini moonquakes, caused by our planet's gravitational pull, sometimes happen several miles below the surface. After that, tiny cracks and fractures appear in the satellite's surface, and gases escape through them.